I'd like to welcome you to the session today, and I'll start by acknowledging the lands on which we all find ourselves. I am very, very grateful and fortunate to be on the land of the Camaragal people, also the Guyamargal people. I'm right near Kiamai Point on the northern beaches in Manly, which is named for the robust-looking people that were here when the first settlers arrived. So really thankful that we can all be here today, and would like to acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are with us today, and to pay my respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge the ongoing custodianship of the lands on which we find ourselves. If you'd like to post in the chat where you're coming from, we'd love to hear it as well. So welcome to the session. As I mentioned, I'm Colleen. I'm the Director of Education and Training here. I've been working at the Centre for Volunteering for over 5 years now. And I also look after our National School of Volunteer Management, which is the RTO component. We're a registered training organisation. And of course, I'm also part of the Centre for Volunteering, your peak body in New South Wales. Quick little housekeeping about the session. As I said, we've just got an hour together, so it is going to be a quick session. We're not going to have a lot of time to delve into things in a great deal of depth, but we do want this to be an interactive workshop, webinar. So please do feel free to unmute yourself and jump in, or otherwise to use the chat functionality, or to even use those little emoticons to let us know how you're going. Lovely to see some familiar faces here today. Mara, that we spoke to just recently on the phone, Christine, welcome to you all. Thanks for joining us here today. And yep, so if you can put your video on if possible, that's great. And mute, we're not participating just because we do get a bit of background noise. And then yeah, use the reactions, ask questions. We will probably not have a break on the session because we've only got an hour, but we do have some time for a bit of chat and a little bit of going through a practical activity to keep us energized. If you're struggling with that late afternoon Thursday feeling and you want to have a break, shout out and we'll have a little bit of a break during the session as well. Hopefully we'll break out for a bit of a poll. We'll break out for a bit of a breakout room as well to have a time to chat together with one another as you go through the gap analysis. So any questions before we start? No, fantastic. Right, so a little bit about the National Standards for Volunteering and kind of what they're all about. Why are we here today? So really the National Standards are best practice volunteer involvement. So when you're working with volunteers, the standards enable you to support safe and effective inclusive volunteering. So really it's about improving the experience of the volunteers and improving the effectiveness and the safety and the proficiency and the brilliance of the organizations that are using them. So what we're going to be talking about a little bit today in our session is we'll just go through kind of a little welcome and introduction, which we've almost done. I'll open it up to you to discuss further. We'll talk about some benefits and considerations about the standards, and then what are your what support around is there for implementation, and what are your kind of next steps along the national standards. So if you are very familiar with the standards, as we know some people here are because they are alumni from our Cert 4 program, if you already know all about the standards, this is will be at best a refresh because this is ideally for those that are new to the national standards. So what are standards? When you're talking about standards, is everyone familiar with what they are as a kind of a practice? I think it's quite important to recognize a couple of key ideas around it. They are voluntary. They're not mandated, these particular standards. They're voluntary, and they set out the kind of specifications, procedures, and guidelines, and they ensure that your systems are safe, consistent, and reliable. So if you think about standards, for example, that you might have in vehicle safety, you can see very clearly like how those safety standards immediately impact on the use of motor vehicles around the world, for example. The national standards are really a framework for best practice. They're not mandated, but they do help improve volunteer involvement across the industry. I want to take you through a little bit of the history of the national standards. You might be familiar with the recent refresh that's come out. The national standards got a lot of energy around them at the moment because they've just been refreshed. Not very much has changed in the national standards. They were actually developed and released originally in 1997. They were adapted from some standards that were created by Volunteering Victoria with their food services in 96. And then they were reviewed again a few times, 2003, 2009, 2014. And then they were finally released in 2015. And they've stood almost unchanged since then. The refresh that's happened in 2024 is essentially a few minor tweaks. They made the language more inclusive. They put a bit more focus on putting the volunteer at the center of the experience. And they've changed the statements instead of just being heading items to be more of a statement that kind of updates the intent of the standards. So you can immediately see by reading the standards, what do they actually mean by instead of just volunteer roles, it's now that volunteer roles are meaningful and tailored, for example. So what we'll do is we'll go through some of the little steps along the standards as we go through and how they're made up. But I wanted to invite you to talk a little bit about your organizations and get a chance to meet one another. So I'll just kind of stop my screen in a moment. But I wonder if you could just let us know a little bit about yourself, then your name and the organization, and kind of one kind of quick sentence to describe your programs and how you work with volunteers. And then getting you to let us know what's one thing that's brought you here. So particularly looking at the benefits of the standards, because one of the key things we need to identify before even starting on this journey with our organizations is, why are we doing it? What are those benefits we're bringing? So curious to know what's brought you to the session today, what benefits you think you might get out of it. And I'd like to, we've got a small group today, so I'd like to have a full whip round of everyone who's in the session. I'm happy for you to jump in and volunteer yourself to go first if you'd like. Otherwise, I can also call around. So just a quick little introduction on what's brought you to the session, what benefits do you think you'll get from the national standards, and then just a little bit about yourself and your programs. So if you could, yes, fantastic. Melanie, first off the gates.
Hello. Yes, I'm Melanie Gates. I'm the coordinator at Broken Hill Landcare. So I'm way out west in New South Wales. It's Landcare, obviously, right across the country depends on volunteers. So we have most of our volunteers, working at different sites for bush regen and all sorts of Landcare activities. So in different parts of the far west. I'm fortunate to be in Broken Hill. We have a fantastic project called the Imperial Lake Nature Park Project, which is just on the outskirts of town. That's led by our honorary president, who's a KC, environmental lawyer, Simon Molesworth. So we're very fortunate to have the Molesworth family leading this project. As I said, our volunteers are crucial. We very much depend on local Broken Hill people to come out to this particular site. It's 145 acres, doing lots of weeding and planting, basically, and always organising activities. So, yeah, we love our volunteers.
I absolutely love Broken Hill. Enough.
It's very different. It's a very different culture, but this whole town runs on volunteers. We have so many different organisations. So
yeah, I had such a good spirit there as well, which is incredible. So what do you think the benefits of the standards are? I mean, what's brought you here for your Thursday afternoon? What do you think you'll get out of looking at the national standards?
Look, basically, I really hadn't given. I've come from a background in child protection, so we didn't have any volunteers. we're very much under the pump trying to find staff there. So it's a different world for me. So I'm really interested to know more about volunteering and just how to best engage them and how to protect them basically and keep them enthusiastic about the different tasks we have. So yes, just more about overall understanding. I'm really keen.
Yeah, fantastic. And I mean, the national standards does exactly that. It gives you a framework. If you're brand new to volunteering space or you've come from a completely different sector, the volunteer the national standards gives you a framework for that volunteer engagement. So fantastic. Thank you so much, Melanie, for sharing. How about you, Mara?
Hi. So as soon as you said Broken Hill, I was like, no, I miss Broken Hill. So my last job that I was in, I used to fly into Broken Hill, get a car, and then have to drive 2 hours to Wilkenya. So I know Broken Hill very well. I used to stay over there many times, so I miss the place. I work for Guide Dogs New South Wales ACT. I would say, how would I describe our volunteer? We have volunteers. I would say the bulk of them are with our dogs, and so one of our main volunteer roles is as a puppy raiser. And then we have many other volunteer roles around with events and fundraising and everything else. So for me, I am new to the organisation. This is a brand new role. So my role is as the volunteer engagement manager. I had one before at the organisation, and so my role right now is to review the entire volunteer package, and what better place than to use standards to benchmark where we're at and where we want to be.
Wonderful. That is absolutely music to my ears. Yes. It's great that you're taking that approach, and it gives you just something to latch on. And it's easy when you're trying to convince people as well that you've got an external reference point. You're like, yeah, it's not just me saying that. Actually, if you look at the national standards,
Yes.
this is supported nationally by an agreed framework. It gives you a bit of leverage, which sometimes you don't always have as a volunteer leader.
Yeah.
Incredible. Thank you. Well, welcome, Mara, and welcome to the Centre for Volunteering, one of our newest members.
Thank you so much.
How about you, Hannah?
Hi, I work with Gidget Foundation Australia, and I've only just started recently in the role after quite an extended hiatus out of the workplace. Previous to that, I was a state volunteer manager for about 9 years. So I am familiar with the standards, but I'm here for a refresher to get my brain going after having 2 babies of my own. So it is a new role that has actually been created in the organisation. So the benefits for me having this refresher, and I'm booked in for next week's webinar as well, is to to have that best practice and that framework in place. And as Mara mentioned too, it is good to just be able to have that resource to also kind of support what you're doing in that space too.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you and welcome. How about you, Christine? Of course, we know Christine quite well as well.
Hi. Afternoon. Is that working?
Yes, perfect. Loud and clear.
Amazing success. So I'm the volunteer support lead at Wesley Mission, and I've been doing this role or similar for about 10 years. So I'm pretty familiar with the standards. We at Wesley Mission have about a half a dozen what we call like volunteer-led services. So they're funded to engage with volunteers. We run Acthus for a big chunk of Sydney, and then Hunter Newcastle, Lifeline. We actually started 60 odd years ago and run the Sydney Sutherland branch of Lifeline. And then of course we have volunteers supporting 60, 70 of our other services that we run across the state. I, in fact, have a volunteer behind me who was a learning and development specialist with Westpac for 20 odd years and has just retired and has joined our learning and development team. And she's very fabulous. I don't know if you can see her in the background there. I'm familiar with the standards. I love the standards. I think they help legitimize internally and externally what we do as a volunteer function. Sometimes we need a bit of help with that. And I'm a bit competitive. I want to become an exemplary volunteer organization. When I learned that was a thing, I decided I really wanted to go for it. So that's kind of on the strategic plan for volunteering at Wesley Mission.
Yeah, amazing. I'm very pleased to hear that. Music to my ears. Incredible. Thank you, Christine. And yeah, I didn't realize I didn't realize that connection with Lifeline. How interesting, even after all this time in the industry. Fantastic. Well, welcome to the session. We will be going through some things that you'll be already be quite familiar with. But yeah, feel free to make it your own and start working on those items that you need to for the accreditation. Incredible. Andrew.
Hi, I'm Andrew Scott. I'm the Bush Care Officer at North Sydney Council. Completed the Certificate 4 in Volunteer Management with Centre for Volunteering, so I'm aware of the standards. I guess I'm in this session for a refresher. I've had been meaning to complete the revision of our Bush Care program guidelines. So I want to just make sure I'm covering all the bases there and give some thought about referencing the standards as well.
Yeah, great. And what makes the standards better than referencing any other documents like the charters, or do you know what makes them good, basically?
What makes them be recognition, wouldn't it? I guess,
Yeah.
like universal recognition, or they're based, aren't these standards like based on the international ones as well? Is that right?
They're
UN.
very closely linked. I mean, if you're looking at a lot of the standards, that even the other quality framework standards, there's a lot of the same things come up again, you know, continuous improvement, leadership and management, having those, making sure there's support services, safety. I mean, there's a lot of standards follow the same kind of framework. I mean, I think when you get down to the criteria level, these are very specific to volunteers and volunteer involving organizations, but they do have similarities across the standards, and there's quite a, wasn't going to go into this, but there is also a connection in terms of the other strategies and charters. They're not directly mapped, but again, they cover very similar information. I think the standards lay it out a bit better, but yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Andrew. Again, same. You might find this is a little bit boring going forward because you know the standards back to front, but yeah, please feel free to start looking at your next steps for your own programs as well. Then we've got a couple of people that are in our office that I know are just helping us out with the recording and things. How about Jan? Are those dinosaurs in the back there, Jan?
No, wildlife.
Oh, wildlife.
Yes, so my name's Jan. I'm president of Tweed Valley Wildlife Carers. So we're a purely voluntary organisation, and we have about nearly 150 volunteers. And we have a 24-hour hotline, and we do rescue and remedial care of wildlife in the Tweed Shire, as the name says. And that's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it can be quite traumatic, and also managing that many volunteers is quite difficult. And I'm really interested in putting the volunteers first and their experience, because we go to a lot of trouble to train these volunteers. They need to give them experience, to get them equipped, and we need to retain them, and that's a problem at the moment, especially given everything else that's happening in the world. We're the featured organisation of wildlife carers for the state, for National Parks and Wildlife for this year. And so I just thought, oh, maybe I should up my game a bit. And I haven't heard of the national standards before. And so, number one, I'm hoping that, we're doing okay in that regard, because I don't know. And also, I'd like to get as much input as I can to look after my volunteers. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Oh, fantastic, Jan. Well, this is one of the things I love about the national standards, that they are applicable to different sizes of organizations, and like large organizations and associations, and like small clubs and large clubs. And actually they're really, you can go into a lot more detail around any one standard, but they are applicable across the board. And I love the fact that you're looking to go to best practice. I think that's incredible. And I think often, you know, some of the some of the sporting organizations or some of the wildlife organizations that are traditionally smaller and doing their own thing, they sometimes are not as engaged with things like the frameworks around the national standards. And it's not necessarily a difficult thing to do. I'm really hoping that as you go through the gap analysis, which we'll go through in a little bit later on the session, that you will you'll be able to see that actually you are already meeting a lot of those criteria. A lot of the things are about, you know, your volunteers being supported, that they know who to turn to, those kind of things. And hopefully you've already tracked off some of them. So I think that is a good way to validate what you're already doing as well. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, Andrew said another reason is to complete the Learning for Your CPD program. Thank you. Good plug. Thank you, Andrew. The Continuing Professional Development Program means you get points for webinars and workshops such as this to be recognized as a professional leader of volunteers ongoing for meeting your continuing professional development. So I think we've just got a couple more, Sarah. Bathurst Meals on Wheels, I'm guessing. Oh, she's posting the chat. Yeah, don't have a mic. No worries at all. Please feel free to use the chat. Sarah Thomas, manager of Bathurst Meals on Wheels, had about 140 volunteers and learning more about best practice. Fantastic, and welcome, Sarah. Diana, would you like to say hi? Diana's from our office as well. And if you're there, oh, you might also, oh, there you are. Hi.
Sorry. Hi, everybody. It's lovely to see some familiar faces there, and it's great to see you all wanting to learn more about the national standards. As Colleen says, they really are the benchmark, and it's great that you are also conscientiously wanting to, achieve that. So thank you so much for coming along today. And I was interested that we've got quite a few rural people, which is really lovely. And I just wanted to give our volunteer leader network plugs a bit of meetings, a little bit of a plug in case anybody would like to join those. There is a link which with an expression of interest, which you on our website, which you can register to join our network meetings. So I won't take up any more Colleen's time. But nice to see you all.
Yeah, Di, please feel free to put those volunteer leader network meetings, put that link in the chat now.
Yeah,
yeah, because that does, it's, I mean, this is a really good way to stay connected and making sure that your it's actually it's on one of the standards, it is one of the criteria of the standards, is that those people that are in charge of your volunteer, that they have the requisite knowledge and skills, and they keep those skills up. So things like doing webinars like this, maintaining your professional development is really key to having best practice volunteer engagement, is actually making sure that your leaders are supported, they're resourced, and they're educated and trained. So thank you very much for popping along, Di. How about Nicola? Nicola Rib.
Hi there. Can everyone see me? Not
we
sure.
We can't see you, but you've got very good sound, Nicola. Oh, there you are. Oh,
hi. I'm here from the Sydney Children's Hospitals Network, and just tuning in today to get a better idea of what the standards are and how we can work towards that as an organisation, as a matter of best practice, I guess. I'm sorry, I'm tuned in a little bit late, so I might have missed the first part of this meeting. If I'm here to answer any questions specifically, please share it with me. I have a team.
Did you say you were the Sydney Children's Hospital Foundation, or the Sydney?
The network. So there is a foundation and a network. The network covers the Children's Hospital at Westmead and Sydney Children's Hospital at Randwick, and then associated services as well. But my volunteers are based at Westmead.
Okay.
And they help out in supporting the carer support program. So looking after our parents and carers on site at Westmead while their child is receiving care, and more specifically at the Parent and Carer Resource Centre that we have here on site, which is a lovely space for parents and carers and families to relax, and our volunteers help keep that running. They're great. Yeah.
Amazing. That must have such a big impact on those people's lives, just to have a warm welcome and a bit of support in such a trying time. Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, welcome. Thank you. Thank you for joining.
Apologies. I jumped on a bit late.
We've mainly just been having a chat. Have I missed anybody? on our intros. I think I've got everyone. Please, if I've missed you, please do shout out. Hopefully my screen is sharing again. Yeah, so I mean, the national standards, it sounds like everyone's already sold here on the national standards, but they do really help. I mean, aside from improving the experience of volunteers, you get better connections with your volunteers. You actually get better customer satisfaction or client satisfaction or welfare satisfaction, Jan, or, better management of your weeds there, Melanie, or whatever it is that you guys are doing. You actually get a better service at the end of the day. You increase recruitment, retention. We all know how important that is. You get less exposure to risk just because you've got a bit of a framework to manage those. You've got that ability to innovate. You get some cost savings, efficiency. You have a bit of an advantage over your competitors. So specifically with things like grants and that, if you can say that you're an exemplary volunteer involving organisation, for example, because you've adhered to the national standards, that does look really good on your programs as well. And people can see that you are a serious volunteer organisation that's got an interest in best practice and supporting your volunteers. And then, yeah, organizational credibility as well. So I think that's pretty exhaustive. But if you think of any others, let me know, because I'd love to add to that list, because it's wonderful to look at what the benefits are. In the implementation workshop, we'll take the benefits to a stakeholder level, because that's quite important from a sales aspect. When you're trying to make that change, is getting the message across in a way to the people that need to facilitate that change in a way that that they will pay attention to it. So there are 8 standards that we've got in our national standards. So the first is that your volunteering is embedded in leadership, governance, and culture. That means your governing body, your organization leaders, they promote volunteering and implement effective systems to support volunteer participation. Your participation is championed and modeled. So this used to be commitment to volunteer involvement on the old standards. They've just changed the wording slightly. So that's commitment to your volunteers' participation is set out through a vision, through planning, through resourcing, and that supports the organization or the group's strategic direction. So that you've got this really clear modeling of volunteering within your organization. Your roles are meaningful and tailored. So that means that your volunteers are engaged, and the roles contribute to the group's or organization's purpose. They meet the volunteers' interests. So that's really putting the volunteers at the forefront here, as well as their preferred style of participation. So we see a little bit in how the standards have changed slightly. There's a little bit more focus on making sure the volunteers are put first. Recruitment is equitable and diversity is valued. So volunteer recruitment and selection strategies, they meet the needs of the organization as well as the volunteers, and they facilitate and value diversity and promote equity and accessibility, so that you've got an opportunity where you can improve the diversity across our volunteering programs. I mean, volunteering traditionally is quite diverse, but there's always room for improvement, and sometimes we find there are barriers that people don't even see, because they can't see beyond the forms that they've already got, for example, and how different things that they are doing with their systems, which are the way they've always done them, actually exclude a large number of people. So I think that's really important that they've recognized that this time around. Your recruitment, yep, I've done that one. Volunteers are supported and developed. So where are we? We're now on the number 5, that blue one at the bottom. Volunteers understand their roles and gain the knowledge, skills, and feedback needed to participate safely and effectively. Your volunteering volunteering safety and well-being is protected. So this just used to be WHS and safety. That's, of course, goes without saying that your volunteers are protected, but also that they understand the rights and responsibilities. So they're aware of where they're working and how they need to be working as well. Volunteers are recognized, another favorite. So your volunteer contribution, value, and impact are understood, appreciated, and acknowledged. And then the last one, and which is why they've like this kind of circular model, is the standards don't sit in isolation and they're not really linear. but there is a kind of a cyclical model around the standards, because the last one is that your policies and practices are continuously improved. So you have this effective volunteering involvement, which comes from best practice, but also this regular review and continuous improvement as you go. Any questions about the standards? I feel like that's fairly straightforward, but good to know if we do have any questions. Oh, good. Right, so how you can use the standards. So depending on your organisation size, and we've obviously got some large organisations, Wesley Mission, ready to get accreditation across all of their thousands of volunteers and very big programs. Other organisations, smaller community groups out in Broken Hill with a kind of a working in a natural space, you might not want to engage it in the standards to that kind of level. But they can be used just as a guide to good practice, you know, so you actually go through the standards and say, look, this is good practice. Oh, we're doing this. Can we improve? You can use it as an audit tool. And I think this is really useful to keep it on your radars every now and then, to go through the national standards and do a bit of a check against your program. How are you faring against the national standards? You can use it as a checklist for making improvements, a starting point for measuring performance. So for those that are brand new, have a look at this straight away, and from what you know about your volunteer programs, assess how you're going. You can use it for planning, and also, of course, for then gaining formal recognition of good practice. Okay, so taking a little bit of a deeper dive into the national standards, I'm just going to share some resources in the chat with you as well here, if you give me one moment. Where have we gone? Keep losing my little taskbar. You know, where the bar that's got all your, I've moved it right into the corner. That will explain it. Where's my little chat? Just to share these resources with you, because there are a lot of resources around the national standards, but I want to share a few of them with you right here. They are also on our website now, which I'll take you to right now. If you just go to volunteering.com.au and then go to resources and tools, national standards, you will get the national standards. And Lucky or Stanley, if you could stick that link in the chat for us, that would be great. But just to kind of run through what the national standards look like. So we got the national standards for volunteer involvement. They've been set up by Volunteering Australia in conjunction with all the peaks, and with a lot of consultation that's happened in 2022 and 2023 for this final refresh. So each of the standards, we've got those high level standards that we've gone through, which I gave through a moment ago, like your policies and procedures are continuously improved. And then what does that mean, really? So, you know, your volunteering comes from a practice of good practice, regular review and continuously. And then you've got your summary of the standard. What is it really about? And that just kind of gives you a high level summary of what it's about. And then for under each of the standards, you've got specific criteria. So there's 4 or 5 criteria for each of the standards. And then under each criteria, you have specific evidence of what does it mean that criteria is shown. So, for example, if you're trying to show your practices and policies are designed and implemented to effectively guide all aspects of volunteer involvement, that you've got strategies, policies, and procedures are informed by current best practice and meet legislative requirements. Your policies and procedures effectively guide best practice. Your employees and volunteers are made aware of their policies and procedures. So there's all of these kind of sub items of evidence or evidence requirements. And then for each of those, you've got evidence examples. So your evidence examples are in the evidence guide. Let's get that one up. And your evidence guide goes through all of the details of your, your evidence examples are specific examples of things that you could show that show how you meet that specific criteria. So if we have a bit of a deep dive into the evidence guide. So for example, you can see if you're looking at standard 2, your participation is championed and modeled. You might have information on how your governing body and public leaders communicate the organization's philosophy, direction, and objectives, and your key documents are publicly available. You can show this by, you know, those key documents which are publicly available, such as your news articles, your public statements, your annual reports, your website information. And in your evidence guide, you'll see all of these things will say evidence may include. So you don't necessarily always have to show, for example, from the accreditation perspective, all of those evidence items, but just some of them. So I've just picked out a couple of examples here just to show you a little bit what the resources look like when you open them. The best place to get it is on our website. If you go to national standards, if you go to volunteering.com.au and then have a look at national standards for volunteer involvement from the resources and tools tab. That is the easiest way to get all of the resources because they are up and live there. So that's kind of the national standards. Does anyone have any questions around how that all works with the kind of the breakdown into evidence? I mean, I find that evidence guide examples, it's actually quite a quick read to get through all of the standards with evidence. And I feel like that it brings it to life a little bit. And you might think, we've already got those things. We already get feedback from our volunteers. We already have training for our volunteers. We've got an induction program. We've got a handbook. You know, a lot of the things you might already have. You think, oh, these would be good evidence that we are meeting those items of the national standards. If you're looking to implement the standards, now, of course, we've got a whole long workshop on implementing the standards because it is more than anything, it's a change management exercise, which is a challenge. If you're trying to input new processes anywhere, you'll know that it needs a bit of planning and it needs the support of a lot of people around it. So one of the first things in the implementation is to go through and identify these benefits and challenges, and doing that at a stakeholder level. We'll go through that in quite a lot more detail in the implementation workshop. But one thing I would like us to do today is this next step, actually, which is the second part, but is to conduct a gap assessment. So to look at your own programs and see how you're going against the national standards. And there are a few different ways of doing that. I think that should actually QR code. If you just QR code that gap assessment, it should hopefully open up for you, and I'll stick it in the chat as well. The easiest way to do it, I think, is we've put it on a kind of a survey format. So it just means you can go through and select met or not yet met. It is also in that chat that I've just, one of the things that I've posted in the chat. You can also get the Excel version of the gap analysis as well. So once you've got your gap assessment, you kind of know where you're tracking at the moment. Really important thing is to then get the support of your organization. So, you know, getting the funding, the human resources, the sponsors, the champions of your program to make sure you have that support internally. Got to develop an action plan for your program. And then one of the key things is just to keep celebrating, reviewing and maintaining that process. So part of that is the continuous improvement, but of course, part of that is just making sure you do celebrate the wins as they happen along the process, because sometimes if you're starting from scratch, it can be quite a long way to get all the way through all of the standards. So if you're starting your gap analysis and you find it's not met, it's partially met as you're going through, don't be discouraged. This is really just a starting point, and this is a best practice framework. You've got to remember that it's not, please don't throw in the towel. It's always going to be a work in progress. Even when you're done, even when you've got your accreditation, it's still going to be a work in progress because there's always room for improvement. So please don't be discouraged, and hopefully you will get some validation from the things that you're already doing. Overall, your implementation is really about 3 key areas. It's the planning, securing the resources, and engaging the stakeholders. And they will happen across all of the steps of the national standards. Okay, so here's your gap analysis. There's a few different ways you can do it. That QR code I was gonna break us into groups, to split us into groups. How do we feel? I've got some eyebrows raised. To go through it together, but ultimately it's an individual exercise to go through your own programs. So maybe we just stay online and do it together now. We'll go through a gap analysis, or we can split into groups and do it. But really, it's essentially you're going through each of the standard, each of the criteria, and recording if you think it's met, partially met, or not met. Of course, it's a self-assessment. When you get to the accreditation level, you'll say it's met, and we'll need to see evidence, and then we'll assess whether that's met or not met based on the evidence. But for this exercise, it's just a self-assessment exercise. It takes about 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes to go through the standards. And it's really good as a good starting point for those that are even like Christine, if you're ready to go ahead with the accreditation. It's still good to have a couple of these gap analysis exercises in that you've done before, because it's good evidence of continuous improvement. It's good evidence that you do audit your programs, that you're concerned about the quality of your volunteer engagement, and that you do review it. So encourage you to go ahead and conduct the gap analysis anyway. It's also worth 2 CPD points for you, Andrew, the gap analysis. So if you use the online gap analysis, I'll just quickly get that link for you right now. And put it in the chat. Oh, the resources. Yeah, thanks for the ones in Dropbox. Images of the file names. Thank you, Stanley. That's not very helpful at all. But you can get the resources on Dropbox. And would you mind posting the link to the national standards on our website as well? And then we'll get the link to the gap analysis for everyone also, so you can go through that. Also, if you don't want to save it on the server, you can just complete it and print it out for yourself. Otherwise, if you do fill it in, it'll come to our office, and we can share a copy of it with you at a later stage if you needed to. Right, I had a plan to go through this now live, so I think yeah. Has anyone started? I see a few people that look busy looking through questions. Has everyone been able to access that gap analysis? Yeah, you're going through it. Okay, fantastic. Well, let's give it a couple of minutes to go through the gap analysis. If you've got any questions as you go through it, please raise them, or any comments as well as you're going through. I'm always particularly interested in what volunteer leaders think will be the most difficult, and what will be the easiest of the standards to implement across the board. As you're going through the National Standards Gap Analysis, what I've found when I've gone through in our programs, it's been quite a good spark of ideas as you're looking at things like, volunteer records are maintained and volunteers employees understand their obligations. You're like, oh, don't know if they do. What would be great would be a kind of a meet the volunteer day, and you come up with these original ideas. So as you're going through, I've ended up adding these little comment spaces there, because I thought it was a good idea to just capture those, so you don't lose them as you're going through the process, because it's a good way of thinking kind of outside of your programs and at a high level, which I think often doesn't happen without the national standards, without the kind of larger framework to look at. And then in terms of the rest of this webinar, all we really have to do is discuss what you thought of the national standards based on your gap analysis when you get through. Let us know, give us a emoticon or a thumbs up if you do get through the national standards. And then I do just have a survey to ask you to please complete for today. It's one of our elements. Is also continuous improvement for us, of course. So if you could just let us know how you found this workshop, and if you'd like any more information. Has anyone got through the national standards yet? It takes about 10 minutes. So I haven't given you enough time yet, I don't think. No, Mara, you're still on number 1. Yeah. Sorry, I'll stop talking for a minute and